It started with my late husband's wallet, a cracked and sweat-stained piece of leather that I pulled from a white kitchen garbage bag sitting on the curb outside my son's six-car garage, and it ended with me garnishing 40% of his attending physician's salary every single month and mailing him a holiday card from a cottage that I own free and clear with no mortgage, no lien, and no one else's name on the deed. That wallet held a slip of paper thinner than onion skin, folded into a square no bigger than a postage stamp, with a warning written in my husband Gerald's fading script, and if I had not untied that trash bag on a concrete driveway in the middle of a suburban afternoon, I would be dead in a state-run mental institution right now, labeled delusional and incompetent, while my son and his wife vacationed on the money they stole from me and told everyone I had embezzled his medical school tuition. But I am getting ahead of myself. My name does not matter for this story, but you can call me Kay. For 15 years I scrubbed office building floors from 11 at night until 7 in the morning, then drove my rusted Corolla straight to a second shift at a medical billing warehouse where I sat in a cubicle under fluorescent lights and keyed in diagnosis and procedure codes until my fingers cramped so badly I had to soak them in warm water before I could make a fist. The first job was at a 12-story commercial tower downtown, where I was one of 6 overnight cleaners responsible for vacuuming 3 miles of carpet, buffing terrazzo lobbies, and scrubbing 47 restrooms with a toothbrush and a bucket of industrial disinfectant that ate the prints off my fingertips. I knew every stain in that building by heart. The coffee spill on the 8th floor break room tile that had soaked into the grout before anyone blotted it, the black scuff marks outside the elevator on 3 that came from a lawyer who dragged his feet, the gum wads under the conference table in 12 that I had to chisel off with a putty knife every third Thursday. The second job was at a data processing center that handled billing for 3 regional hospital networks, and I learned to read explanation of benefits forms the way other people read novels, spotting duplicate charges and coding errors before the supervisors ever caught them. Every single dollar I earned above the cost of a rented room above a dry cleaner, and a diet of powdered soup and day-old bread, went toward the Parent Plus loans I had taken out so my son Brian could attend medical school without a single cent of debt in his own name. The loans, when I first signed the promissory notes in a cramped financial aid office with a pen that kept running out of ink, totaled $85,000, but by the time the interest was capitalized and the fees were stacked on top, the balance ballooned to just over $93,000 before I started throwing every spare dollar at the principal. I tracked the balance on a yellow legal pad that I kept under my mattress, recalculating the amortization by hand every month because I didn't trust the online portal, and I paid them off in full 2 years before Brian finished his cardiology fellowship. The day I made the final payment, I walked out of the post office and stood in the parking lot with the receipt in my hand and wept until a stranger asked me if I needed an ambulance. Brian had promised me, with his hand on my shoulder and actual tears in his eyes, the morning he matched into his internal medicine residency, that the first thing he would do when he started earning attending money was buy a house with a mother-in-law suite, and I would never have to scrub a toilet again. I believed him. I was his mother. I had held his hand through thunderstorms, driven him to every piano lesson and science fair, and fed him before I fed myself for his entire childhood, and when his father died of a stroke during his second year of medical school, I did not even take time off to grieve because I could not afford to miss a single shift. I just kept working, kept paying, and kept believing the promise. My husband Gerald was a quiet man who fixed industrial sewing machines at a textile plant before the plant closed, and the work got shipped overseas. He had thick hands that could dismantle a Juki overlock machine blindfolded, and a mind that understood mechanical relationships in a way that bordered on genius, but he never finished high school, and he was embarrassed about his grammar, so he let me handle all the paperwork. The only thing he ever asked of me after we married was that I keep his old leather wallet in my dresser drawer, because it had a photo of the 3 of us tucked behind his driver's license, a snapshot taken at a county fair where Brian was maybe 7 years old, and holding a stick of cotton candy bigger than his head. I kept that wallet for decades, even when the leather cracked along the fold and the photo faded to sepia ghosts, and the stitching around the edges started to unravel. It lived in the top drawer of whatever dresser I owned, moving with me from our small house to a rented apartment to the room above the dry cleaner, and I never opened the hidden pocket behind the photo sleeve because I assumed it was just a design feature, a fold of leather that had been stitched closed at the factory. I also had a practical skill that very few people knew about. a skill I picked up during my overnight cleaning shifts because the property manager of the commercial tower, a man named Ellis who had worked maintenance there for 30 years, taught me how to pop a basic wafer lock when tenants forgot to leave their interior office doors unlocked and the trash bins inside needed to be emptied. Ellis was a wiry 72-year-old with knuckles like walnuts and a habit of whistling the same 6 bars of an old Hank Williams song while he worked. He kept a small leather case in his tool bag with a tension wrench and a rake pick, and one night on the 4th floor, standing outside the office of a tax attorney who never remembered to leave his door unbolted, he showed me how to insert the tension wrench into the bottom of the keyway, apply gentle rotational pressure no heavier than the weight of a quarter on a fingertip, and then zip the rake pick across the pins until they set and the plug turned. It took me about 10 tries before I got the feel for it, the tiny click of each pin stack reaching the shear line, the subtle give of the plug when it was ready to rotate. After a few weeks of practice on unused basement doors, I could open most interior wafer locks in under 20 seconds. I never used the skill for anything improper. I just wanted to get the trash emptied on time and avoid getting written up for a missed bin. I kept a small set of picks in my own tool pouch, the one I carried with my cleaning supplies, and I considered it just another piece of equipment like a putty knife or a grout brush. The day my life detonated started like an ordinary Sunday morning. I had worked a double shift the day before, and my back ached in the particular way it always did after I spent 6 hours bent over a buffer, so I was moving slowly, making a cup of instant coffee on the hot plate in my rented room above the dry cleaner. I was waiting for Brian's promised phone call about house hunting. He had finished his cardiology fellowship 3 weeks earlier and accepted an attending position at a large cardiology practice with a starting salary that made my eyes water when I looked it up online, $480,000 a year plus a signing bonus, and I thought the delay in calling me was just him settling into the new job. Instead of his voice, I got a voicemail from a number I did not recognize. The message was 37 seconds long and delivered in a flat bureaucratic tone by a county clerk, who informed me that a temporary restraining order had been filed against me by Dr. Brian Dorsey and his wife Melissa, alleging that I had been stalking them, making erratic threats, and exhibiting signs of severe mental instability. The order required me to stay 500 feet away from their residence at all times, and to surrender any firearms, which I did not own. I replayed the message 3 times, standing in the middle of my rented room with a coffee cup cooling in my hand, trying to process the words like they were a foreign language. While the phone was still in my hand, a process server knocked on my door and handed me a second envelope containing a notice that the house I had helped Brian and Melissa purchase, by co-signing the mortgage, had been sold at market value for $680,000. And that I would need to vacate my apartment within 72 hours because the lease was in Brian's name and had been terminated effective immediately. Attached to the notice was a copy of a letter Brian had sent to the extended family, claiming that an audit of his medical school finances had revealed that I had embezzled over $40,000 of his tuition money over a period of several years, redirecting the funds into a secret account for my own use. The letter said I had become paranoid and delusional, that I was giving away my belongings to strangers, and that the family should not engage with me if I reached out, because I was a danger to myself and others. I sat down on the edge of my bed, with the papers spread across the worn quilt, and read every line 3 times while my hands went cold and the room tilted at the edges. By sundown, I was standing on the sidewalk outside the dry cleaner with 2 suitcases, a backpack, and the old tool pouch I had grabbed from under the kitchen sink, when I realized I might never be allowed back inside. I had managed to pack with a strange, detached clarity, folding my clothes into neat rectangles and wrapping Gerald's wallet in a clean handkerchief before tucking it into the inner pocket of my winter coat. Even though it was only October, I walked to a bus stop, carrying my whole life in 3 bags, and took a rattling city bus to a motel near the interstate that charged $49 a night and smelled like cigarette ash and industrial carpet cleaner. The room had a door that didn't close flush with the frame, a television bolted to the wall, and a mattress that sagged in the middle so deeply that rolling over felt like climbing a hill. I sat on the edge of that mattress and tried to understand how the son I had raised, the boy I had fed and clothed and sacrificed every comfort for, had decided to erase me from his life with a stack of legal documents and a smear campaign that turned me into a villain before I even knew I was on trial. Within 24 hours, the vultures circled. Brian and Melissa drove to the motel in a pearl-white Audi SUV that probably cost more than I had earned in 2 years of double shifts, its polished flanks catching the sickly yellow glare of the parking lot lights. Melissa wore a cashmere wrap in a shade of lavender that looked like it had never been touched by a wrinkle, and her hair was blown out in a smooth helmet that did not move when she turned her head. Brian wore a navy blazer with a silk pocket square and his stethoscope still looped around his neck, the tubing a bright, shiny chrome that caught the light when he walked, as if he wanted me to remember that he was a doctor and I was not. They did not knock. Brian used a key card he had somehow obtained from the front desk. I later learned he had told the night clerk that his mentally unstable mother was a danger to herself and needed an immediate wellness check, and walked into my room while I was sitting on the bed in my clothes, too exhausted to move. "Mom," he said, his voice thick with the kind of practiced sympathy I had heard doctors use on terrified patients. "We're not angry. We know you've been struggling, and we just want to help. The things you've done with the money, with the erratic behavior, it's a symptom of something medical. We have a guest suite that's perfect for you, and you can stay with us while we get you evaluated and stabilized. You don't need to be alone in a place like this." Melissa was already moving through the room, opening my suitcases without asking, making little clicking sounds with her tongue as she assessed my belongings. She held up a sweater my sister had knitted for me before she passed navy wool with a cable knit pattern down the front that had taken her 6 months to finish, and dropped it into a plastic donation bag with a look of faint disgust. She tossed a small cedar box of Gerald's cufflinks, the ones he had worn on our wedding day, and that I had polished with a soft cloth every year on our anniversary, into the same bag without even opening it to see what was inside. Then she picked up Gerald's wallet from the nightstand where I had placed it. She held it between 2 fingers as if it were a dead insect, curled her lip at the cracked leather and the frayed stitching, and dropped it into a white kitchen garbage bag full of old receipts and crumpled tissues, and a half-eaten granola bar wrapper that she had brought in from the car specifically for this purpose. "We don't need clutter," Melissa said, her voice all polished sympathy with a hard, bright edge underneath. "You're going to be in a clean, organized space now, Kay. It'll help with your recovery." I did not argue. I did not scream or demand my wallet back. I let my eyes go unfocused and my shoulders slump, and I nodded slowly, playing the part of a confused, foggy woman who had been beaten down by life and whose grasp on reality was slipping. I had learned in my nights of sitting alone in that motel room that my only weapon was their underestimation of me, and so I fed it. I watched Brian's face as I nodded, and I saw something flicker behind his carefully arranged expression of concern. It was not relief exactly. It was satisfaction, the satisfaction of a predator who sees that the prey has stopped running. I filed that look away in a part of my mind that was still functioning with cold, precise clarity, and I waited until they announced they were going to drive to a nearby coffee drive-thru to get us all lattes, a gesture of false generosity that I recognized as a tactic to keep me compliant and drowsy. As soon as their SUV pulled out of the motel parking lot and turned onto the main road, I untied the white garbage bag that Melissa had left on the floor beside the television stand. My hands were steady, even though my heart was banging against my ribs, and I slipped Gerald's wallet out from among the trash and slid it into the inner pocket of my coat, pressing it flat against my ribs where they would not feel it if they hugged me or patted me down. The wallet was cool and solid against my skin, like a piece of shrapnel I had pulled from the wreckage of my life. That night, after Brian and Melissa had installed me in their guest suite, a room with pale grey walls, a bed dressed in percale sheets that felt like ice against my skin, and a window that looked out onto a manicured lawn dotted with landscape lighting, and after they had retired to their master bedroom with a soft click of the door, I sat on the edge of the bed and opened Gerald's wallet for the first time in years. I spread it flat on the nightstand under the dim glow of a bedside lamp, and traced my fingers over the worn photo behind the plastic sleeve, the 3 of us at the county fair with cotton candy, and a sky the color of faded denim. Brian's face in the photo was round and unguarded, smeared with sticky sugar, his eyes crinkled in a laugh that I had not seen on his adult face in a decade. I had always known there was a hidden pocket behind the photo sleeve, a thin slit that had been stitched closed at the factory or maybe by Gerald himself, and I had never thought to open it because Gerald had told me it was just a manufacturing flaw, a seam that hadn't been finished properly. But that night, sitting in the pristine bedroom of the son, who had just tried to have me declared incompetent, I understood with a sudden, nauseating clarity that Gerald had been warning me about something for years, and I had not been listening. Using a pair of cuticle scissors I found in the guest bathroom, I worried at the threads along the edge of the photo sleeve until the seam gave way and the leather unfolded to reveal a hidden compartment no bigger than a credit card. Inside was a single sheet of onion skin paper, folded into a tight square that had been pressed flat by decades of being carried against a man's chest. I unfolded the paper with hands that were shaking from exhaustion and adrenaline and the low hum of fear that had been vibrating in my bones since the moment the process server knocked on my door. Gerald's handwriting was spidery and uneven, the letters tilting backward as if he had written the note in a hurry or with a hand weakened by the stroke that would eventually kill him. The note said, "Kay, if you're reading this after I'm gone, listen close. Brian came to me 3 months before I died asking for money I didn't have. He said he owed a private lender and they would hurt him. I told him to be honest with you. He laughed. He said I was a washed-up factory worker who didn't understand how the world worked and that I should mind my own business. I think he meant to borrow against our house without telling us, and when I said no, he looked at me with a coldness I have never seen in a human being. Do not trust him with large sums. Do not sign anything he puts in front of you without a lawyer you have chosen yourself. He is not the son we raised. I am so sorry I didn't tell you sooner. I didn't want to break your heart." The note was dated 7 weeks before Gerald's stroke, written on the back of a receipt from a diner where he used to drink coffee with his retired union buddies, the paper stained with a ring from a coffee cup. I read it 3 times, and then I folded it into a square again and tucked it inside the waistband of my underwear, where no one would find it if they searched my room while I was asleep. Before I continue this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe that family can sometimes be the enemy you never saw coming, and that the quiet ones are often the most dangerous when pushed too far. The next morning, after a sleepless night spent staring at the ceiling and replaying every conversation I had ever had with my son, Brian presented me with a stack of documents at their kitchen island. The island was a slab of white quartz veined with grey, so long it could seat 8 people, and the stools were upholstered in leather that matched the seats of their Audi. Melissa poured me a glass of freshly squeezed orange juice from a glass pitcher and set it in front of me with the careful, patient movement of a nurse handling a fragile patient. A small plate of cut fruit sat beside it, melon, berries, a few slices of kiwi arranged in a fan, and I understood that this was part of the performance, the image of care that they were creating so that later, if anyone asked, they could say they had given me fresh fruit and a clean room and all the gentleness in the world. The documents in the stack included a durable power of attorney that would grant Brian the legal authority to manage all of my financial affairs without oversight, a medical consent form that would allow him to make every healthcare decision on my behalf without consulting me, and a property transfer deed that would sign over any remaining interest I held in the house they had already sold, extinguishing my claim to the equity I had helped build with years of mortgage co-signing. The power of attorney was a long-form statutory document, the kind that grants an agent sweeping powers over bank accounts, real estate, retirement funds, and even the authority to make gifts to themselves from the principal's assets, and it was flagged with yellow sticky tabs on pages 6, 11, and 14, each one pointing to a signature line. "Mom, this is all standard," Brian said, tapping the pages with a heavy silver pen that had his initials engraved on the clip. "It just lets me take care of things while you focus on getting well. The stress of handling bills and paperwork is clearly too much for you right now. Look at what happened with the tuition money. We're not blaming you for that, okay? We understand that you weren't in your right mind, but we need to protect you from yourself so this doesn't happen again. Just sign where I flagged the pages, and I'll handle everything from here." I looked at the flagged lines, the little yellow sticky tabs shaped like arrows pointing to the signature blocks, and I felt the folded square of onion skin paper in my waistband like a live coal against my skin. I let my eyes go unfocused and my mouth go slack. I tipped my head slightly to the side and mumbled something about feeling dizzy, that my head felt like it was full of wet cotton, that I had never been any good with legal documents anyway, because Gerald had always handled that sort of thing. I told Brian that I trusted him completely, that he was a doctor and he knew what was best, but that I really needed to lie down for a while before I could think clearly enough to hold a pen. I asked if I could take a nap first and then sign everything when I woke up. I let my voice tremble on the word nap, like a child asking permission. Melissa shot Brian a look that lasted maybe half a second, but I caught it from under my lowered eyelids. It was a look of irritated triumph, the expression of someone who has been forced to wait longer than she wanted, but can finally see the finish line. Brian patted my hand and told me to rest as long as I needed. "We've got all the time in the world, Mom," he said, and the lie was so smooth it almost sounded like love. They let me retreat to the guest suite while the documents stayed spread out on the quartz island, the sticky tabs curling slightly in the warm air from the kitchen. I had not left a single smudge of ink on any of them. Over the next 3 weeks I became a ghost in my son's house. I kept to the guest suite for most of the day, emerging only when summoned for meals or when I needed to use the bathroom down the hall. I ate whatever they put in front of me with slow, mechanical movements and answered their questions in halting, foggy sentences that trailed off before they reached a conclusion. I wore the same grey cardigan for days on end until it started to smell faintly of sweat, and I let my hair go unwashed and tangled so that it fell across my face in lank strings. I shuffled when I walked, letting my slippers scrape against the hardwood, and I let my gaze drift to the middle distance whenever they spoke to me. I could see the tension in Brian's shoulders, relaxing a little more each day as he convinced himself that the woman who had once worked 2 jobs and paid off $93,000 in loans was gone, replaced by a compliant shell that would sign anything if you pushed the paper close enough to her hand. Melissa began to speak about me in the third person even when I was in the room. "She seems stable today," she would say to Brian over breakfast, as if I were a piece of furniture that occasionally made noise. I catalogued every slight, every dismissive glance, every moment they forgot I had ears and a mind and a memory that was working perfectly. Houses have rhythms, and once you learn the rhythms of a house you can move through it like a ghost when the occupants are gone. Brian worked a rotating schedule of 12-hour shifts and overnight call, leaving the house at 5:30 in the morning with a travel mug of coffee, and returning after dark with dark circles under his eyes and the exhausted, irritable energy of a man who spent his days saving other people's lives and had nothing left for the people in his own home. Melissa left the house every weekday morning at 9:15 for a Pilates class at a studio in the affluent part of town, and then she would spend the next several hours doing what she described as errands. A word I came to understand meant networking lunches with other doctors' wives, shopping trips to boutiques where a single blouse cost more than my monthly rent, and appointments with the financial advisors who were helping her construct the shell company that would eventually drain my trust. Their home office was at the end of the upstairs hallway, a room with a heavy oak door and a small brass lock on the knob that they often forgot to engage. From my guest suite on the opposite end of the same hallway, I trained myself to wake at 3 in the morning, the hour when the house was so silent I could hear the refrigerator compressor cycling on and off 2 floors below, and I would creep down the hallway in bare feet and press my ear to the gap between the door and the frame, while Melissa took calls that she clearly believed no one else could hear. The fragments I collected over those weeks pieced together like a jigsaw puzzle with a dark and recognizable shape. I heard Melissa say, on a Wednesday night when her voice was tight with the particular panic of someone whose scheme is hitting unexpected resistance, "No, the capital call window closes in 18 days. We cannot afford to miss it. I told you she's fine, she's completely compliant, she's barely speaking in full sentences anymore. The signature will happen this week, I swear on my life." I heard her on a Friday afternoon, pacing in front of the office window because I could hear her footsteps change direction every few seconds. "Well, call them back and tell them the trustee approval is imminent. We just need the medical certificate and the personal appearance, and then the funds clear. Yes, I know what the interest rate on the bridge loan is, I'm not an idiot, but we'll pay it off the second the trust distribution hits. Tell them to extend the repayment window by 14 days, and I'll send them the signed medical certificate by overnight courier." I heard Brian, late one Thursday night when he thought I was asleep, hissing at Melissa in the kitchen over the low hum of the dishwasher. "If the Department of Education flags the consolidation before we get her signature on the release, the whole thing unwinds. Do you understand that? The promissory note has her social security number on it and a notary stamp from a woman who never met her. If anyone checks, we're done. We'll have a federal loan fraud investigation, and that means every single financial account we have gets frozen while they sort it out." I knew enough about financial words from my years in the medical billing warehouse to catch capital call, which meant a demand for funds from investors who had committed capital to a private fund, and bridge loan, which was a short-term high-interest loan meant to cover a gap until permanent financing arrived. I also recognized the word trustee and the phrase trust distribution, and my stomach went cold. Gerald had mentioned a trust years ago, something he had set up through his union, but I had never seen the paperwork, and I had assumed it was a small death benefit that had been dissolved when he passed. If Brian and Melissa needed my signature and my personal appearance to unlock a trust, It meant there was a pot of money that was untouchable without my consent, and Gerald's note had been explicit: do not sign anything. One afternoon, about a week into my stay, I caused a minor household accident to test how much they were underestimating me. I had been biding my time, waiting for a moment when my competence could reveal itself in a way that seemed accidental rather than calculated. I was in the kitchen, shuffling toward the refrigerator to get a glass of water, and I deliberately misjudged the distance between my elbow and the counter so that I knocked a full glass bottle of expensive olive oil, the kind that costs $40 a litre and comes in a heavy artisanal bottle with a cork stopper, off the edge. It hit the ceramic tile floor with a sound like a gunshot, spraying golden oil in a 3-foot radius across the grout lines and underneath the edge of the cabinetry. Melissa screamed, a short, startled shriek, and ran for paper towels, dabbing uselessly at the spreading slick while the oil seeped deeper into the porous grout. Brian stood frozen in the doorway with his hands at his sides, staring at the mess with the helpless expression of a man who had never scrubbed a floor in his life and had always paid someone else to handle the messes he created. I pulled a cleaning caddy from under the kitchen sink. It was a plastic caddy that Melissa kept stocked with high-end, brand-name cleaning products she had seen advertised in glossy home magazines, but the real tools were the ones I had smuggled into the house inside my tool pouch. A spray bottle of commercial-grade degreaser that I had refilled from the janitorial closet at my old office building before I left, a roll of blue sharp towels that absorbed oil without leaving lint, a grout brush with stiff nylon bristles that were angled to reach into the seams, and a box of baking soda that I had found in the back of the pantry and that I knew from years of experience could lift oil stains out of grout better than any product sold in a spray bottle. I knelt on the floor, ignoring the way my knees cracked against the tile, and I went to work. First, I sprinkled baking soda across the entire spill to absorb the surface oil, working it into a paste with a few drops of water. Then I used the grout brush in tight, circular motions along every grout line, digging out the oil that had already started to set. I wiped the excess paste with the blue sharp towels, sprayed the tile with degreaser, and buffed the surface dry with a microfiber cloth. In 5 minutes the floor gleamed. The grout lines were white again, the tile reflected the kitchen lights. I collected the shattered glass using a damp paper towel technique that trapped every splinter without cutting my fingers, and I dropped the whole bundle into the trash with a soft, final thud. Melissa stood with her roll of now sodden paper towels drooping in her hand, and I saw something shift behind her eyes. It was not gratitude. It was a flicker of unease, the first small crack in the facade of my helplessness. "Where did you learn to do that?" she asked, her voice a little too high, the polished lilt slipping. I mumbled something about watching a YouTube video and shuffled back to my room, dragging my slippers across the clean floor. But I heard her whisper to Brian later that evening when they thought I was asleep. "She's not as far gone as we thought. She cleaned that floor like a professional. What if she's playing us?" Brian's response was muffled but dismissive, something about old muscle memory, and that being foggy didn't mean being completely incapacitated. Still, I knew I had planted a seed of doubt, and doubt would make them sloppy. The real break came on a Wednesday afternoon when both of them were out of the house simultaneously. Melissa had her Pilates class followed by a lunch date with a friend who lived across town, and Brian was on a 24-hour hospital shift that he had complained about at breakfast with a string of muttered profanities, because it meant he would miss a golf outing with the other attendings and fall behind in the unspoken social ranking of the cardiology department. I had 4 hours alone, and I did not waste a single minute. I started in their home office, which I had already scouted during my nighttime listening sessions. The door was unlocked because Melissa had been in there paying bills that morning and had rushed out without turning the small brass lock on the knob. Inside, against the far wall underneath a framed diploma from Brian's medical school, was a tall grey lateral filing cabinet made of heavy-gauge steel, the kind of cabinet that law firms and medical offices used to store sensitive documents. It had a tubular pin-tumbler lock on the top drawer, a round silver cylinder with a small keyhole in the center, the kind of lock that is common on vending machines and bicycle locks and cheaper gun safes. The lock was a 7-pin tubular mechanism, and I recognized it immediately because Ellis had shown me a similar 1 year ago and had explained that while they looked intimidating, they could be picked without specialized tools if you had time, patience, and a few household items. I did not have my old lock-picking set, which was inside my tool pouch that I had left in a storage locker I could not access, but I had found a box of cheap ballpoint pens in the kitchen junk drawer, a pair of sharp-pointed tweezers from the guest bathroom that I had been using to pluck my eyebrows with exaggerated slowness every morning to sell the image of a woman clinging to small routines, and a small flathead screwdriver that I had lifted from the same kitchen junk drawer when Melissa was distracted by a phone call about a delivery. Tubular larks work on a ring of pins arranged in a circle around the plug, and the traditional method for picking them involves a tool called a tubular pick that can set all the pins simultaneously. But you can improvise an impression tool using a cheap Bic pen with a soft plastic barrel. I removed the ink cartridge from the pen, used my teeth to pull out the small plastic plug at the tip, and then heated the open end of the barrel with a barbecue lighter I found in the kitchen drawer. I held the flame just far enough away to soften the plastic without melting it, and when the rim was pliable and slightly glossy, I pressed it firmly into the lark cylinder, wiggling it gently to force the softened plastic into the pin chambers. As the plastic cooled, it took an impression of the pins, tiny indentations that corresponded to the different pin heights, and by gently turning the pen while applying steady rotational pressure, I was able to set the pins one by one over the course of about 25 tense minutes. Every creak of the house settling made me freeze and listen, but the only sounds were the distant hum of the HVAC system and the occasional whoosh of a car passing on the street outside. The plug finally turned with a soft, satisfying click, and the top drawer slid open on smooth metal rollers. Inside, I found hanging file folders labeled with cryptic abbreviations that I immediately recognized from my years of processing medical billing codes. DPL Consolidated. Read one label, and I knew DPL stood for Direct Plus Loan, the federal program under which I had taken out Brian's tuition loans. Offshore Seychelles. Read another, and my stomach dropped. Trust GPB. Read a third, and I felt a rush of cold adrenaline because GPB were my husband's initials, Gerald Patrick Blevins. I pulled the DPL file first and spread the contents across the desk, which was a slab of dark wood with a leather bladder and a neatly arranged row of gold-plated desk accessories. The file contained a Direct Plus Loan consolidation application that had been submitted to the U.S. Department of Education 6 weeks earlier. Around the same time, Brian had first told the family I was losing my mind. It listed my full name as the borrower, K. Marie Blevins Dorsey, my social security number, my date of birth, and a new consolidated loan amount of $193,000 with a repayment term of 25 years at a fixed interest rate of 7%. The monthly payment schedule was attached on a separate page, showing figures that started at just over $1,400 per month and escalated over time. Below the numbers on the signature line was a replication of my signature that looked almost perfect. The loop on the capital K, the slight upward slant of the middle letters, the way I always trailed the final Y into a small flourish. It was so accurate that for a horrifying second I wondered if I had signed it in a fugue state and forgotten. But the pressure pattern was too uniform, the ink flow too consistent across the entire signature, and I had signed enough documents in my life to know that a real signature has micro-variations in line weight that a traced copy lacks. I had never seen the document before. I had never been contacted by the Department of Education about a consolidation. According to the promissory note, the loan had been electronically filed from an IP address that matched my son's home router. I could see the IP log printed in the footer, and the final page bore a notary stamp and signature from a woman named Patricia Holloway, certifying that I had personally appeared before her in the state of Texas on a specific date in March. On that date, I had been in Ohio, working a double shift at the billing warehouse with a time card and a supervisor named Margaret Chen who could prove it. I took photographs of every page using a prepaid burner phone I had purchased at a gas station on a fake errand to buy toothpaste. The phone was a cheap black rectangle with a numeric keypad and a grainy camera, paid for with crumpled $10 bills that could not be traced to any account. I photographed the consolidation application, the promissory note, the notary page with Patricia Holloway's stamp and her Texas Notary Commission number clearly visible. Then I carefully replaced the DPL file in the cabinet and pulled the Offshore Seychelles folder. This file contained incorporation papers for a shell company called Blue Harbor Holdings Limited, registered in the Seychelles Islands, an archipelago nation in the Indian Ocean known for its strict corporate privacy laws and its resistance to international financial investigations. The registered agent was a firm called Indigo Corporate Services Limited, with a mailing address in Victoria. Mahay and Melissa Elaine Dorsey was listed as the sole director and shareholder. Attached to the incorporation papers were quarterly bank statements from an account at Seychelles International Bank, showing deposits that made my vision blur. A transfer of $170,000 from a mortgage refinance on the house I had co-signed, executed through a title company in Ohio, and then routed through a correspondent bank in London before landing in the Seychelles. A deposit of $92,000 from a personal loan taken out in Brian's name against his future attending income, a loan that had been underwritten by a private lender who specialized in high-risk physician loans and who apparently did not ask many questions, and a deposit of $55,000 from a source labeled only as GPB Trust Withdrawal Partial, with a reference number that matched the trust documents I would find moments later. The dates on the deposits aligned precisely with the period when Brian had been pressuring me to sign the property transfer deed and the power of attorney forms. If I had signed those documents, the remaining trust funds would likely have been emptied into that offshore account immediately, and I would have been left holding the consolidated loan debt while they vanished into a labyrinth of shell corporations and numbered accounts. I photographed every page, my hand so steady now that I could feel my heartbeat in my fingertips, but I did not let it shake the phone. Then I pulled the third file, Trust GPB. This was the document that tied everything together. The trust, formerly titled the Gerald Patrick Blevins Irrevocable Trust, had been established 22 years earlier through Gerald's Union, the Amalgamated Textile Workers Local 412. It was funded by a whole life insurance policy Gerald had taken out when Brian was born, a policy with a cash value that had been growing quietly for decades inside a conservative mutual fund allocation. The trustee was a regional bank called Harborstone Trust and Fiduciary, located in a small brick building in downtown Cleveland. The terms were clear and ironclad, written in the dense but unambiguous language of a lawyer who had been instructed to build a fortress. The sole beneficiary of the trust was me, K. Blevins Dorsey, and upon my death the remaining principal and any accumulated income would pass to Brian, contingent on the trust having been administered properly. But there was a critical provision buried in Article 7, Section 3, a provision that Gerald must have insisted on during the drafting and refused to let the lawyer water down. Any withdrawal, distribution, or amendment to the trust required my notarized, in-person consent at the physical office of Harborstone Trust and Fiduciary, accompanied by a medical certificate of sound mind that had been issued by a licensed physician within the preceding 30 days. If I was declared mentally incompetent by any court, the trust would freeze all distributions and undergo an automatic forensic audit by an independent accounting firm chosen by the trustee. And if I died under suspicious circumstances while the trust was contested, or if there was any evidence of foul play connected to my death, the entire balance would revert irrevocably to a designated charity, the Textile Workers Children's Education Fund, a non-profit that provided scholarships to the children of union members who had been laid off or disabled. Brian could not inherit a single dime without me walking into that bank alive, of sound mind and willing. The trust currently held just over $300,000 in conservative mutual fund shares, and Brian had already attempted a partial withdrawal of $55,000 using a forged medical certificate that purported to demonstrate my advanced dementia and a notarized letter from a doctor who did not exist. The trustee had flagged the request as suspicious because the certifying physician's license number did not match any active practitioner in the state of Ohio, and they had demanded a personal appearance from me before releasing any additional funds. That was why Brian and Melissa had not simply killed me. That was why they needed me alive, compliant, and standing at the counter of a specific bank branch, signing a distribution authorization form, with a live human being watching my hand move across the paper. I heard the garage door motor engage from the other end of the house, a low mechanical rumble, followed by the heavy clatter of the door settling into its tracks. My heart slammed against my ribs so hard I felt the pulse in my temples. I moved with the speed of someone who had spent 15 years being timed on her cleaning routes, where a lagging pace meant a write-up. I closed the filing cabinet, used the flathead screwdriver to reset the lock plug, and wiped the surfaces I had touched with a microfiber cloth from my cleaning caddy, which I had brought into the office under the pretense of dusting the bookshelves. I slipped back to the guest suite with the burner phone pressed against my thigh, my legs trembling, and I lay down on the bed and pulled the covers up to my chin. I closed my eyes and slowed my breathing until it sounded like sleep, and I catalogued what I had gathered, photographic evidence of a forged federal loan consolidation that crossed state lines and therefore fell under the jurisdiction of the U.S. Department of Education's Office of Inspector General, an offshore shell company with bank statements showing large, suspicious deposits sourced from illegally obtained funds, documentation of a fraudulent trust withdrawal attempt using a forged medical certificate, and a notary fraud that involved a Texas notary who was certifying signatures for people who had never appeared before her. But I had no way to bring this evidence to the authorities without being dismissed as the delusional woman whom my son had already primed the family and the court system to ignore. I needed an ally inside the system, someone with the power to freeze accounts and launch investigations, and who would believe a woman with unwashed hair and a pocket full of burner phone photographs. The ally arrived sooner than I expected, in the form of a voicemail that I discovered when I checked the guest suite's cordless phone during a rare window of privacy. Melissa was in the shower down the hall, and I could hear the water running through the pipes, so I picked up the handset and dialed the voicemail access code. A woman named Elaine Voss, who identified herself as a senior compliance officer at Harborstone Trust and Fiduciary, left her direct line and a case reference number, GPB 4471, and asked me to return her call from a secure number regarding irregular activity on the Gerald Blevins Trust account. Her voice was clipped and practiced, the voice of someone who had spent a career sitting across tables from people who lied to her about money, and had learned to hear the lie in the first 3 words of every explanation. I did not call back right away because I had noticed that Melissa listened to my phone messages regularly, checking the handset's call log and even positioning herself near the guest suite door when she thought I might be on the phone. I waited until 3 in the morning on a night when Brian was working an overnight shift, and Melissa had taken a sleeping pill with a glass of wine and was snoring loudly enough to be heard through the closed door of the master suite. I crept into the kitchen, where they kept a landline phone mounted on the wall next to a whiteboard covered in grocery lists and appointment reminders, and I dialed the number Elaine Voss had left. My fingers trembled as I pressed the buttons, and I kept one eye on the dark hallway, listening for the creak of floorboards that would signal Melissa stirring. Elaine Voss picked up on the second ring. "Harborstone Compliance, this is Elaine." Her voice was fully alert, as if she had been waiting for the call at 3 in the morning, which told me everything I needed to know about the seriousness of the irregularities she was investigating. "This is Kay Dorsey," I whispered into the receiver. "You left me a message about my husband's trust." There was a pause, the kind of pause that happens when someone is mentally shifting from a prepared script to an unpredictable reality. "Mrs. Dorsey, I've been trying to reach you for several weeks. Your son's attorney presented a medical certificate claiming you are suffering from advanced cognitive decline and requesting a full distribution of the Gerald Blevins Trust. We have flagged 3 separate irregularities. The notary who witnessed your signature on the distribution request is a Patricia Holloway, and she is already under federal investigation in the Eastern District of Texas for notarizing over 200 documents without requiring personal appearance. The IP address associated with the electronic submission of the request traces back to a residence listed under your son's name and address in this state. And our internal fraud detection algorithm, which compares signature biometrics across all documents processed by the bank, flagged a high probability match between the signature on the trust distribution request and a prior loan consolidation document filed with the Department of Education last month. We have been informally notified by the department that they are reviewing that consolidation for forgery. Can you confirm, in your own words, that you have not authorized any of these transactions?" I stood in the dark kitchen with the phone pressed to my ear and my heart pounding so hard I was afraid Melissa would hear it from upstairs. My reflection in the black window over the sink was a pale ghost, a woman with tangled hair and a grey cardigan and eyes that had not slept properly in weeks. I whispered into the receiver, "I am of perfectly sound mind. I have never signed any of those documents. I am currently being held under false pretenses in my son's home, while he and his wife try to force me to sign away my rights to the trust. They have filed a false restraining order against me and are telling the family I have dementia and embezzled money. I have photographs of forged documents, offshore bank statements, and incorporation papers for a shell company in the Seychelles." There was a pause on the other end of the line, a silence so complete that I thought the call had dropped. Then Elaine Voss's voice returned, lower and slower than before, stripped of the professional polish. "Mrs. Dorsey, if what you are telling me is true, this constitutes multiple federal felonies including wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, elder financial exploitation across state lines, and conspiracy to commit money laundering." I am required by law to file a suspicious activity report with the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, which is FinCEN, within 30 days of detecting potentially criminal activity. Once that SAR is filed, the FBI's white-collar crime division will be notified and will have the authority to open a formal investigation. I can place an internal hold on all trust distributions pending the outcome of that investigation, but I need hard evidence of your son's intent to defraud. The photographs you mentioned, are they date-stamped and clear enough to be read? I told her yes. I described the burner phone, the photographs I had taken, the filing cabinet, the lock I had impressioned with a Bic pen barrel. Elaine Vast did not flinch at the mention of lockpicking. She gave me the name and direct number of Special Agent Daniela Reyes at the FBI's Cleveland field office, along with instructions for uploading the photographs to a secure evidence portal that Harborstone maintained for regulatory investigations. She also gave me one more piece of information that changed the tactical shape of everything I had been planning. The trust's dead man switch clause was not just a theoretical protection. It was an active, legally enforceable mechanism that would trigger a full forensic audit and a freeze on all assets the moment anyone filed a competency petition against me without my cooperation. If Brian tried to have me declared incompetent by a court, the bank's own legal department would intervene and demand an independent medical evaluation at the bank's expense, which would of course find me perfectly competent. And if anything happened to me, if I died or disappeared under circumstances that even remotely suggested foul play, the entire trust balance would be transferred immediately to the Textile Workers' Children's Education Fund, and Brian would never see a cent. Gerald had built a fortress around me that I had never known existed, and he had done it quietly, without fanfare, using the same mechanical patience he had once used to rebuild sewing machines. Armed with this knowledge, I decided to test the limits of Brian's humanity. I needed to know, before I set the final confrontation in motion, whether there was any shred of the boy I had raised left inside the man who had forged my signature and planned my institutionalization. I had been living in their house for almost a month by then, and I had observed 1,000 small cruelties: the way Brian never looked me in the eye when he spoke, the way Melissa referred to me as the patient when she thought I couldn't hear, the way they both tensed every time I mentioned anything that suggested I remembered my old life. But I needed a definitive test, something that would strip away every layer of performance and reveal what was underneath. I staged a medical scare on a Sunday morning when both Brian and Melissa were home, and the house was filled with the smell of expensive coffee from a machine that ground its own beans, and the sound of a morning news show playing on the kitchen television. I had practiced the collapse in the privacy of the guest suite for 2 days, going limp onto a pile of pillows I had arranged on the floor so that when the moment came, my body would remember the motion, and I would not involuntarily brace myself or put out my hands. I wanted the fall to look authentic, the kind of sudden, boneless collapse that signals a stroke or a cardiac event. On Sunday morning, I walked into the kitchen holding a ceramic coffee mug, the same mug I used every morning, a plain white one from a drugstore that Melissa had designated as mine because she didn't want me using her matched set. And when I was about 3 feet from the island where Brian was scrolling through his iPad, I let my knees buckle. I let my eyes roll back until the kitchen dissolved into a blur of white and grey. I let my body drop forward like a sack of laundry, my shoulder hitting the edge of a cabinet on the way down, and my head bouncing off the tile floor with a sound that was sickening even to me. The coffee mug shattered, spraying hot coffee across the front of my cardigan and across the pristine white tile, and I lay there with one arm twisted underneath me and my breathing so shallow that my chest barely moved. Through my half-closed eyelids, I saw Brian look up from his iPad. He did not move toward me. He did not call my name or check my pulse or tilt my head back to open my airway, which any first-year medical student knows is the first thing you do when someone collapses. He remained seated on his leather stool, the iPad still glowing in his hands, and his expression was not alarmed or grief-stricken or even mildly concerned. It was annoyed, the way you look at a piece of malfunctioning equipment that is interrupting your morning. Melissa stepped around my body, careful to avoid the spreading puddle of coffee so it would not stain her cream-coloured slippers, and bent to grab my purse from the kitchen counter. She unzipped it with quick, efficient movements and pulled out my wallet, riffling through the compartments with the practiced speed of someone who had done this before. She found my driver's license and the unsigned power of attorney forms that they had been pressuring me to sign for weeks, and she held the license up to the light. "Do you have the forgery template still?" she said, her voice utterly calm, as if I were not lying on the floor, possibly dying 3 feet away. We can use the license photo to practice the signature again. We need it to be perfect for the bank. The compliance officer at Harborstone has seen her actual signature on the original trust documents, and she's going to be comparing them. Brian nodded without looking up from his screen. The template is in the office top drawer under the printer paper. Make sure you get the loop on the Y right, and the spacing between the first and last name. The forensic guys look at letter spacing. Melissa nodded and walked out of the kitchen toward the office, stepping over my prone body on her way out. I felt the hem of her slippers brush against my arm. I lay on that cold tile floor for 3 more minutes, long enough for the spilled coffee to soak through my cardigan and chill my skin underneath, long enough for the ceramic shards to bite into my palm where I had landed on a fragment, drawing a thin line of blood that pooled under my hand, long enough to hear the refrigerator kick on and off, to hear the morning news anchor's voice talking about a weather front moving in from the west, to hear Brian finish whatever he was reading on his iPad and sigh, and stand up from his stool. He walked past me to the refrigerator to get more coffee creamer. He stepped over my legs with the casual, practiced movement of someone stepping over a threshold. He did not look down. He did not touch me. He simply stepped around me as if I were a piece of furniture that had been left in the wrong spot. In that moment, any residual love I had felt for my son, any lingering hope that he might be acting under pressure or coercion or some temporary madness, died on that kitchen floor. The boy who used to fall asleep clutching my hand during thunderstorms, who had brought me dandelions in a paper cup because he thought they were roses, who had promised with tears in his eyes to take care of me forever, was gone. What remained was a stranger wearing the face of my child, and I owed that stranger nothing. I rose slowly, using the edge of the counter to pull myself up because my shoulder throbbed from the fall and my palm was sticky with blood. I brushed the coffee grounds off my cardigan and wiped my hand on the inside of my sleeve. Brian's back was turned, his attention on the refrigerator and the creamer and the comfortable routine of his Sunday morning. The garage door was open from when Melissa had brought the recycling bin out earlier, and I passed through it without looking back. I walked to the bus stop at the end of their subdivision, a bench under a metal awning where I had never seen anyone actually waiting, and I caught a bus that took me to a diner on the edge of town, where the coffee tasted like pencil shavings, and the booths had duct tape over the vinyl splits. There, in a booth in the back corner where I could see the door, I called Special Agent Daniela Reyes and arranged a meeting. 2 agents met me at a public library 3 towns over later that afternoon, in a quiet study room with a table and 4 chairs, and a window that looked out onto a parking lot. I sat down and told them everything while they took notes on yellow legal pads, and uploaded the photographs from the burner phone into a secure evidence system on a laptop that one of them had brought. Agent Reyes was a woman in her 40s with short grey hair and a calm, steady voice that never interrupted me, and when I finished she closed her notebook and said, "Mrs. Dorsey, we're going to coordinate with the U.S. Attorney's Office and Harborstone's legal team. We need your son and his wife to believe they still have the upper hand while we gather the final pieces. Can you go back to the house without them suspecting anything?" I told her I could not go back. The kitchen floor was still sticky with my coffee, and the time for playing dead was over. Instead, I suggested a location, the diner where I was sitting, which was close enough to the bank that Brian would not be suspicious if I suggested we meet there to discuss things before we go inside. The agents agreed. Over the next 3 days, I stayed in a motel that they arranged, and I coordinated with Elaine Voss and the FBI to stage the confrontation. The confrontation happened 4 days later. Brian and Melissa had been trying to reach me through the phone they had given me, a cheap prepaid flip phone that Melissa monitored, but I had left it in a locker at the bus station, along with a note that said I was going for a walk and would be back soon. They tracked me through the GPS signal on Melissa's own Find My Friends app, which had been tracking my location without my knowledge since the day I moved into their guest suite. She had installed it on the phone and linked it to her own account, a detail I had discovered during my nighttime investigations. I had known about the tracking and had used it to my advantage, letting the phone sit in the bus station locker for 3 days so that the location data showed me wandering aimlessly around the transit center, when in reality I was 2 towns away meeting with federal agents. On the 4th day I retrieved the phone and sent a single text message. "I'm at the Sunrise Diner on Route 12. I'm ready to talk about the bank. Come alone." Within 40 minutes their pearl-white Audi pulled into the parking lot, its polished flanks gleaming in the afternoon sun. Brian and Melissa walked into the diner at 2 o'clock on a Tuesday, their faces tight with a mixture of fury and desperation. Brian's blazer was slightly rumpled, the first time I had ever seen a wrinkle on him, and Melissa's hair was pulled back in a hasty ponytail instead of her usual smooth helmet. They slid into the booth across from me, and Brian placed a thick manila envelope on the table between us. He leaned forward with his elbows planted on the cracked formica, and his voice was a low, controlled hiss, stripped of every earlier pretense of concern. "Mom," he said, "we are done playing games. Your name is on a consolidated loan balance of just under $200,000. The bank is about to initiate foreclosure proceedings on the trust assets if we don't resolve the outstanding withdrawal request, and if that happens, you lose everything Gerald left you. We are going to the Harborstone branch downtown, and you are going to walk in there with me and authorize the distribution to clear your debts. You are going to do it calmly and cooperatively, and then we can talk about finding you a nice memory care facility where you'll be comfortable, and I won't have to worry about you wandering off again. Do you understand?" He pushed the envelope toward me, and I could see the yellow sticky flags through the gap in the flap, signaling where he expected me to sign. I took a sip of the diner coffee, which had gone lukewarm in the time I had been waiting. I set the cup down carefully on its saucer, and I looked directly into my son's eyes for the first time since the day the process server had knocked on my apartment door. My voice, when I spoke, was steady and quiet, and carried none of the foggy confusion I had been performing for weeks. "No, Brian," I said, "I will not sign away my husband's legacy so you can funnel it into an offshore shell company registered in the Seychelles Islands under your wife's name." The effect was immediate. Brian's face went slack for half a second, a flicker of pure shock that he could not control, and behind him Melissa inhaled sharply and her arms dropped to her sides. "How do you know about that?" she demanded, her polished voice cracking at the edges. I did not answer her. I opened the envelope and spread its contents across the table one by one, like a dealer laying out a hand of cards. First, I placed a printed copy of the forged Direct Plus Loan Consolidation application, with the notary stamp and the Texas date highlighted in yellow. Second, I placed the bank statements from the Seychelles Shell Company, showing the deposits from the mortgage refinance and the trust withdrawal. Third, I placed a printed email from Elaine Voss at Harborstone Trust, confirming that a suspicious activity report had been filed with FinCEN, and that the FBI had opened a case file under number CLE 2847FR. And fourth, I placed a single sheet of paper that I did not show them the contents of, but which I identified as a sealed indictment from the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Northern District of Ohio, charging them with felony elder fraud, wire fraud, and aggravated identity theft. I did not actually have the indictment yet. The grand jury was still secret, but they did not know that, and the other documents were authentic enough to make them believe it. The color drained from Brian's face until it was the shade of skim milk curdling in a carton. Brian's hand shot out to grab the papers. I pulled them back before his fingers could close on them, sliding them into a neat stack under my palm. "If you touch me or anything on this table," I said, my voice flat and calm, "the 2 federal agents sitting in the blue sedan across the street will be inside this diner before your hand hits the floor. Every word you have spoken since you walked through that door has been recorded on the device in my pocket, which is transmitting in real time to the FBI's Cleveland field office." Brian's head swiveled toward the window, where a nondescript sedan with government plates was parked against the curb, its engine idling and 2 silhouettes visible in the front seats. His jaw tightened in a way that I recognized from his childhood, the expression he used to make when he was caught in a lie and was trying to calculate his way out of it. Melissa tried a different approach. She dropped the angry mask and let her voice tremble, let her eyes well up with tears that I recognized as purely performative, because I had seen the same tears in the eyes of debt collectors who tried to intimidate me over the phone. "Kay, please," she said, reaching a hand across the table as if to touch mine. "You're confused. You've been under so much stress and we only ever wanted to help you. Brian loves you. We both love you. Let's all just go to the bank together and sort this out face to face like a family. No one needs to involve the authorities. This is a private family matter." She was still angling for my physical presence at the bank. She needed me to walk through those doors, to stand in front of the compliance officer, to undo the dead man's switch that Gerald had so carefully constructed. Without my living, competent body at that counter, the trust was an impenetrable vault that would sit frozen for decades until the charity inherited it all. I stood up from the booth, holding my coffee cup in one hand. The diner was almost empty, just an old man in a trucker cap at the counter and a waitress wiping down the pie case, but I spoke loud enough for them to hear because I wanted witnesses. "The only thing that awaits you at Harborstone Trust," I said, "is a senior compliance officer who has already filed a federal financial crimes report, an FBI agent with a warrant for your arrest, and a trust document that requires my notarized signature in person, accompanied by a medical certificate of sound mind. You cannot forge that certificate again because the doctor you used doesn't exist. You cannot force my signature because I am standing here in front of witnesses telling you that I will never sign. And you cannot inherit a penny if I die, because Gerald made sure that every cent would go to the textile workers' children's education fund the moment anything happened to me. You are not getting the money. You are not getting the house. You are not even getting your medical license, because when the state board reviews your character and fitness, they will see the fraud convictions on your record." I set the coffee cup down on the table, the ceramic clicking softly against the formica, and I picked up my bag. "I spent 15 years scrubbing toilets and keying medical codes so you could become a doctor. I paid off $93,000 in loans with my own hands while you stood at a podium and took an oath to do no harm. And you repaid me with forgery, false restraining orders, and a plan to lock me away in an institution while you drained a trust fund that was meant to protect me. So no, Brian, I will not sign your papers, and I will not be your scapegoat." The diner door chimed. 2 agents in dark suits, including Agent Reyes and a uniformed local officer, walked directly to the booth. They presented their badges, small leather cases flipped open to reveal gold shields and photo ID, and read Brian and Melissa their rights in calm, practiced voices. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Brian stared straight ahead with the blank expression of a man who has just watched the floor give way beneath his feet and has not yet begun to fall. Melissa began to cry, great heaving sobs that shook her shoulders, but the tears were for herself and her shattered plans, not for me. The agents placed them both in handcuffs, Brian first, then Melissa, her wrists thin and pale against the steel, and led them out of the diner while the old man in the trucker cap watched with his coffee cup frozen halfway to his lips. I finished my lukewarm coffee, left a $2 tip on the table next to the crumpled napkin, and walked out of the diner into a spring afternoon that felt like the first real day of my life. The aftermath played out over the next 18 months in a series of procedural steps that I could not have navigated without the skills I decided to build during the investigation itself. The FBI's white-collar division worked quickly once they had the evidence I provided, uncovering a tangled web of fraud that extended beyond what I had found in the filing cabinet. Brian and Melissa had been living far beyond his residence salary for years, funding their image with a rotating carousel of private loans, credit card debt, and eventually outright fraud. Melissa, with her background in pharmaceutical sales and a network of financial advisors who operated in the grey zones of the industry, had been the architect of the shell company and the offshore accounts. They had stolen my identity to consolidate my Parent Plus loans into a massive new debt that they intended to discharge by having me declared incompetent, institutionalized, and eventually deceased under controlled circumstances. The false restraining order, the mental health narrative they circulated to the family, the notary stamp they had purchased from a corrupt practitioner in Texas, the incorporation in the Seychelles, all of it formed a coherent, chilling plan that would have left me penniless and imprisoned in a facility while they walked away rich, their reputations intact, their crimes invisible to anyone who did not know to look. But Gerald's foresight was the flywheel that spun their entire scheme into wreckage. The dead man switch clause in the trust, which he had insisted on over the objections of the lawyer who drafted it, a young associate who had told him it was unnecessary paranoia, meant that the money was impenetrable without my willing, competent cooperation. The partial withdrawal they had executed early on, the $55,000 that had been routed to the Seychelles, was clawed back in full by Harborstone's fraud recovery unit, working in coordination with the Seychelles Financial Intelligence Unit under a mutual legal assistance treaty. The shell company, Blue Harbor Holdings Limited, was identified by an international asset recovery team, and its accounts were frozen and eventually repatriated to the U.S. Treasury, where the funds sat in escrow until the civil judgment was finalized. The forged loan consolidation was voided by the Department of Education after a forensic examiner confirmed that the signature was a trace of my driver's license copy, and my original Parent Plus loan records were corrected to show a zero balance because I had already paid them off with years of double shifts and powdered soup. I was not saddled with debt. I was free. During the months while the criminal case was being built, I made a decision. I would not simply be a victim who got lucky because her late husband had been smarter than her son. I enrolled in an accelerated paralegal certificate program at a community college, attending night classes in a fluorescent-lit classroom after my shifts at the billing warehouse, drawing on the same reservoir of focus and endurance that had carried me through 15 years of overnight cleaning. My background in medical billing gave me an unexpected head start on legal research and financial analysis, because I could read a balance sheet the way other students read a textbook, and I could spot discrepancies in a stack of legal documents the way I once spotted duplicate charges on an explanation of benefits form. I learned to draft motions, to calendar court deadlines, to shepherdize case citations until I could do it in my sleep. I graduated in 9 months with honors, the oldest student in the program, and I accepted a job at a small law firm that specialized in elder law and financial fraud, the exact kind of law that had saved me. My supervisor, there was a 61-year-old attorney named Diane Ristan, who had been fighting financial predators for 30 years, a woman with a silver barb and a sharp, unsparing laugh, who mentored me through every step of the civil lawsuit I filed against Brian and Melissa for fraud, conversion, breach of fiduciary duty, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The civil case was precise, methodical, and devastating. We submitted over 400 exhibits, bound in thick black binders with numbered tabs, the photographs I had taken in their home office, the notarized affidavits from Elaine Voss and the FBI agents, the forensic document examiner's report proving the signatures were traced from a scanned license copy, and the Department of Education's determination of forgery. Brian's defense attorney, a silver-haired man in a suit that cost more than my first car, tried to argue that I had given implied consent, that the finances were a family matter, that no harm had actually been done because the loans were voided, and the trust was intact. But the judge, a woman in her 60s with reading glasses perched on the end of her nose, was not persuaded. At the summary judgment hearing, she read the key provisions of Gerald's trust aloud into the record, pausing on the dead man's switch clause, and then she looked over her glasses at Brian's attorney and said, "This trust was drafted with more foresight than I see in most estate plans today. Counsel, your clients are fortunate the plaintiff's late husband was not alive to witness what they attempted, because I suspect he would have handled this himself." Summary judgment was granted on all counts. Damages were calculated at $210,000, representing the equity I had lost in the house I co-signed, the legal fees I had incurred, the value of the stolen trust withdrawal that had not been fully recovered, and 9% statutory interest from the date of the fraud. The court ordered wage garnishment of 40% of Brian's gross income, applicable to any form of compensation including wages, consulting fees, investment returns, and royalties, for a period of 20 years or until the full judgment was satisfied, whichever came later. Since his medical license was revoked by the state board on grounds of moral turpitude, and he was permanently barred from practicing medicine in the United States, his earning potential had cratered, but the garnishment attached to any income he might generate from whatever work he could find after his release from federal prison. I attended Brian's criminal sentencing at the federal courthouse downtown. The courtroom had high ceilings and wooden benches that smelled like furniture polish, and I sat in the back row, where I could see the back of Brian's head and the slump of his shoulders inside an orange jumpsuit. He was convicted on 6 counts of wire fraud, 2 counts of aggravated identity theft, and 1 count of conspiracy to commit elder financial exploitation. The judge, a different judge this time, noted at sentencing that the cruelty of the scheme, the targeting of a mother who had sacrificed herself for his career while he stood at podiums and swore an oath to do no harm, weighed heavily as an enhancement. He received an 8-year sentence in a federal correctional institution in West Virginia, and Melissa received 5 years for her role as the coordinator of the offshore accounts and the shell company. The family members who had swallowed Brian's narrative and written me off as a delusional thief sent letters of apology, some of them long and tearful, some of them stiff with the discomfort of people who realized too late that they had been complicit in a terrible lie. I stacked them in a drawer in my new kitchen, and I never read past the first sentence of any of them. I was not interested in their guilt. I was interested in the quiet, steady work of reclaiming my life. I bought a cottage near Lake Erie with the first settlement payment and a portion of the trust distribution that Harborstone released once the legal freeze was lifted and the SAR investigation was closed with a finding of fraud. The cottage is modest, 1-story, with a wide front porch that catches the morning sun and a garden where I planted peonies and mint, and a row of tomato plants that I tend with my own hands. There are no stairs for anyone to trip on accidentally, no steps for someone to fall down in a staged accident. The deed is in my name alone, free and clear, recorded at the county courthouse in a quiet afternoon ceremony that I performed alone. Inside my dresser drawer, next to the wallet I pulled from a garbage bag on the curb, I keep a small wooden box of holiday cards I had printed years ago, back when I still believed I would spend my old age in a mother-in-law suite attached to my son's house. Every December I address one of those cards to Brian at whatever correctional facility he is housed in that year. I stamp it and I mail it. The card says in simple script, "Thinking of you this season. Love, Mom." There is no forgiveness in it, no plea for reconciliation. It is just a postmark, a signature, a small rectangle of paper that arrives in his institutional mailbox and tells him, without using a single word beyond the printed greeting, that I am alive, I am free, and I am still deciding when to be generous with my grace. As of last month, the wage garnishment has returned a total of $210,000 to my accounts, including accumulated interest. Every check that arrives, processed through the court's disbursement unit, and deposited into my credit union account by direct transfer, is a small, quiet confirmation that the system can work if you feed it the right evidence and refuse to give up on the paper trail. I still work at the elder law firm 3 days a week, helping other people my age untangle the webs of fraud and manipulation that family members weave around them. The work keeps my mind sharp and my anger useful. If you ever discover a dark secret about someone you trusted completely, my advice is this: do not spend your energy on the shark. Spend it on observation. Let them underestimate you. Find the paper trail, because money leaves a track in the mud, and people who think they are smarter than you will always leave a trail. Then find the person inside the system who has a legal duty to report fraud and hand them the trail. You do not need to be a paralegal or a federal agent or a compliance officer. You only need to be quiet, patient, and utterly unwilling to sign your own destruction. Have you ever discovered a dark secret about someone you trusted completely? How did you handle it? I would love to hear your story in the comments. And if you want to see more accounts of ordinary people who turned the tables on those who betrayed them, hit that subscribe button and tap the bell. It helps more than you know. This is Kay, reminding you that the quiet ones often know exactly which lark to pick.